Yeah, we're live.
Nice.
Yeah, I see. It's I'm going to retweet it now.
Yeah, we got 2-5. Ooh, we're picking up people. All right. So, Yoav, are you in Tel Aviv as well, or?
Yeah, we're in the same neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, we're actually something like probably 500 yards from one another.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice neighborhood. It's kind of Tel Aviv, but still suburbia.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
for a long time, when I was doing Ruby Rogues podcast, I guess for the first couple of years, one of my co-hosts there, we lived in the same neighborhood, and so yeah, it was kind of funny. It's like, yeah, we went to church together and everything. It was fun. Anyway,
Just a second, I'll be ready in a second. Did you see that thing I sent that we are ranked 5 or what, something like that, or on programming podcasts?
yeah, they send that. I usually get those, and I get them every year. Um, Part of the deal is they want you to put the badge and the link um to their website on your webpage. So
Yeah.
I've
Uh,
put it up before. It
no,
doesn't
yeah,
make a hill of beans
obviously,
one way or the other.
yeah. It's pretty meaningless. I was just amused.
Yeah, I mean, if they could demonstrate that there was any rigor to their process of picking podcasts, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, yeah, it is what it is. Okay, I'm ready. So from my perspective, we can start.
all right, sounds good.
Yeah.
I will get us rolling. Hey, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript
Mhm.
Jabber. This week on our panel, we have Dan Shapir.
Hello from Tel Aviv.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. Hello from Lehi, Utah. We also have a special guest, and that is Yoav Abrahami. I hope I got close,
You
man. I'm
got it
sorry.
right.
Yeah. I got on when you guys were chatting when I hopped on, and I was like, yeah, my Hebrew's atrocious because I don't speak it. So yeah, anyway. Yeah, so you're VP. Did I get that right? No, CTO of Enterprise at Wix, right?
I'm CTO of Wix Enterprise, which is like it's funny to say it's like a small startup of trying to take Wix, which is mostly a consumer product
Mm-hmm.
and designer product, and adapt it to enterprise sales. And
Okay,
so it's exciting.
very cool. So
We actually
I'm just
had
gonna
you up
ask.
before, just so you know.
Yeah, I was gonna
We
say
had
I
you.
think we've had you before.
Yeah, we had
It-
you up
it-
before about almost 2 years, about 2 years ago, I think.
2 years ago, I think. Yeah, that was exciting. It was a very different topic, I think, and we had a very heated debate there about
Yeah,
clouds and code ownership.
Yeah,
yeah. With AJ, who unfortunately cannot join today.
yeah. I'll put a link into the
Mhm.
chats. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can pick it up there and go listen to that one too. Um, so besides I guess your title at Wix, what else has changed the last few years?
So, the first thing that changed was that I used to be the head of a Wix developer platform, a co-head of that, and moved to another position. I'm also working on another initiative, which part of it is creating a new web framework, which is kind of why I'm very interested in that topic of web frameworks.
Uh-huh.
And I think those are the two major things. So when you talk about Israel, there is another big thing that happened in the last year and a half, but
Uh-huh.
I will probably leave that out of the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, the political situation there is a little bit fraught and
More.
everything, but yeah, the war.
Yeah.
I keep hearing about hostages coming home, which is a good thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last few weeks have been, you know, kind of a bright spot in this pretty
Yeah.
dark tunnel that hostages that have been held for coming on 500 days
Yeah.
are finally being released.
Basically a year and a half. Yeah.
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 Yeah, hopefully it will continue. They are being released, in small batches a few every week, and hopefully this will continue. Anyway,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
let's talk tech though.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk tech. So framework. So you said you're building your own framework, which,
Yeah.
I guess it's been a week, so we can use another one. Do you want to just talk briefly about that and what you're pulling together? I don't know. Maybe Dan had a different direction he wanted to take this.
No, it's fine.
I think, what I'm trying to solve is the problem of designer and developer collaboration.
Oh, okay.
And so it's trying to do a framework that allows a designer to basically publish or deploy the application.
Okay.
Think about the designer changing the application and deploying the application. That's kind of what I'm trying to solve. It is a very, very big requirement.
Uh-huh.
And the funny thing is that it actually becomes evident at some point that it is actually the same requirement as allowing you to consume third-party components in a safe way. So think about using some other component of another company and not being exposed to their code in a way that can create a risk to your application. And
Mhm.
it somehow, or in order to support designer-developer collaboration, when you break that requirement down into what it means, you get that other possibility as well. Again, it's still work in progress. It's very, very experimental. And so I'm not going to go and steal the podcast, making announcements, go and look and use my framework. That's not the point. But this is something of why I'm very opinionated and why I'm looked very deeply into different frameworks.
It's an interesting thing that when JavaScript and the DOM along with it were created, they were created specifically for designers or thinkers. The actual developers were supposed to be using Java or something like that. And it's interesting to see how the developers have kind of co-opted JavaScript and TypeScript, and with the frameworks, the heavy-duty frameworks that we have today, they're definitely geared towards developers and much less towards designers or people like
Mhm.
that. I'm
Mhm.
thinking like if I'm, somebody learning to code and being thrown into React, that's it's easy to drown. I think.
I think it's even more than that. Think, I'll take you in two different directions. One, think about developers and system 15 years ago. 15 years ago, a developer would never deploy an application. That would never happen. They would build something up, then hand it over to system. They would do acceptance tests, and then after testing, checking, they would deploy the application at some point. And then we had DevOps,
Mhm.
which changed the way we work. It moved the responsibility to deploy an application from system to the developer, and it gave developers the tools to make the application work. And those are different tools than the ones that system have. And what I'm looking to do now is to shift it again from the developer to the designer. Now, just think about it. A designer that has no idea how to code, has no understanding of creating and running an application or a stable application, would deploy your application. That sounds scary. But that's actually what happened with system and developers 15 years ago. Now, it also means that the tools that the designers are using are very different. They're not going to write HTML or CSS. That's not how they work. If you go and look at what they're using, Photoshop, Figma, there's a bunch of other tools. It's not HTML and CSS. So you need to bridge a much larger gap and then hand over the responsibility to them and hand over the tools to them so that they can be effective and own the application.
That's what we have AI for, no?
Mm, Well, you know, AI can do a lot, but unfortunately, up until today, it didn't replace the developer or the designer. We still have a few years for us, at least.
When people ask me if I'm worried about um, AI replacing developers, I say, well, eventually AI will replace everybody. So it's just a question of time
Mhm.
when they'll get to you. Nobody's safe. Anyway, um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When people ask me the question, it's, well, not yet. I mean, some of the tools are really nice, but at the end of the day, making the decisions that I make, they just are not there at all.
Yeah,
um,
I think the easiest way to understand that is if you'll give an AI to fly a jetliner, it would do that very, very well, probably better than any human pilot. It would fly a plane in a very correct way into a mountain. And it would be very correct and a very smooth flight. But it's okay for it to fly it into a mountain. So I think
you
this is kind of the gap that we have with AI.
you remind me. I had a friend who was an airline pilot, and he basically described his job to me once as like 100 hours of boredom and 5 minutes of pure terror.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean, we've had autopilot for years, and it's been a tool that the pilots have used for years, and it's worked great. We typically don't see too many airline catastrophes, the last week notwithstanding, and um, but it's a different problem. It's a different set of problems than what we're talking about with programming.
well, it's actually easier for an AI to fly a plane than to drive a car. But let's put
Yeah.
let I would like to pull us back to talk about frameworks, and I would actually like to start with something that I've been thinking about a lot, and in fact, even had a kind of a change of perspective about. And I can talk about that, but I first would like to hear you, Yoav, and that's talking about what are in fact framework. What constitutes a framework versus, say, a library or a set of tools or an application or whatever.
Hmm.
So, for me, the definition is actually pretty simple. Every software, everything, any kind of software in the world can be split into two kinds of interactions. There is an interaction that is going into your code, something calling your code, and there is an interaction where your code is calling something else.
Hmm.
Now, when your code is calling something else, you have a choice. You can choose which tool you are going to use to call something else. Now, you have to use a tool. There is no way to call something else without using a tool. Might be a system library, might be a built-in library, might be some higher level library like npm or some other package. But there is always you have the choice almost everywhere of what to use. That is where it is a set of tools that you can just choose from. But when you are being called, you don't have the choice of who is calling you. You are building an application within some kind of a container that runs your code or some kind of box that calls your code. This is what is a framework. It is a frame that is activating your code on different entry points. And then your code can choose the different things and give and call some exit points, some using some utilities and some tools.
So I had the exact same outlook on frameworks versus libraries, but then my point of view shifted a little bit. And now I think about it more in the context of architecture. When I think about when you're dictating the architecture, it's libraries. When the architecture is kind of dictated to you, that's a framework.
Mm.
But it's kind of same.
Yeah,
You
there's a
can.
big overlap, but it
Hmm.
does shift the perspective a bit. I think that the best frameworks are the frameworks that they make the architecture of the solution that you're going to build more clearer. Put it this way. You know where the pieces are supposed to slide in.
I think what you're talking here is about something a little bit different. When you talk about frameworks, there's a few concepts that have emerged over time to make software to be easier to code against. One is the ability to make it easy to be tested in a simple environment. Another one is the concept of locality of definition, so that all of the concerns are in one file and not spread across multiple files. And another thing that is little bit subtle is that the syntax is such that when you read it, you can understand what it does. People tend to call it no magic, but I don't like that definition because we as developers consider everything smart that someone has written as magic. So it's not, I won't say that. I would say that if it makes you write in a syntax that is easy for the average developer that is working with you to understand what's going on, then it is probably doing something good, that framework.
The principle of least surprise, basically.
Yeah. So
So,
look, yeah.
so my question with that is, so I mean, folks that listen to the show know that I do most of my work in Ruby on Rails, and some of that is true, right? Some of it you read stuff or you read the code and is you pretty intuitively know what it does. But some of the stuff you pretty intuitively know what it does because you've been doing Rails for 20 years, right? And so you look at it and you know what the conventions are and you follow it. So how much of it's one and how much of it's the other, right? With React or Vue or any of these other tools that might give you that sense of, okay, I can look at this code and know what it is. How much of that is, wow, it clarifies that that's what's going on here, and how much of that is, I've been doing React for long enough that I know that's what this code is.
You know the measure of U against A? Have you heard about that? When you
Uh-uh.
go into a new system and you're like, hey, it's doing something really exciting. Woo. And then when you go into another, and then you try to make it do something and it doesn't work. And then you figure, it has to work that way. That's not intuitive. That's the measure. It's the measure
Oh,
of
okay.
how much times it's doing things in the way you expect it to be doing versus how much times it surprises you doing something in a very unintuitive way. This is kind of a measure for APIs and developer tools to know how good they are. Though the A moments against the U moments.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. At the end of the day, I'm always drawn back to the no silver bullet article that talks about essential versus um, what was the other one? Essential complexity versus non-essential complexity.
Mhm.
And we are solving complicated problems. At least we strive to. And when you solve complicated problems, even when there are strong guidelines for what the architecture should be like, don't expect the solution to be trivial. That's point number one. And point number two, you try to make a system idiot proof, but then somebody goes along and invents a better idiot. So people will always find way to surprise you and
It's
work
true.
against the grain of what the framework encourages. Um, you know,
But I think Dan, sorry for cutting you, but I think
no,
there is
go for it.
you need to look at frameworks in three different aspects. There is one which is the functional aspect. Does it have, that does it doing is it doing what you need it to be doing? And are different frameworks similar in terms of the functional aspects of the framework, regardless of the syntax? And then there is a second question, which is when you look at the non-functionals, like performance, for instance, are they equal? Or do you even care? Is the difference significant? For example, is the fact that Svelte is much more efficient than React, is it something you really care about in your specific case, your specific application? And only after you're done with those two, with the functional and non-functional, only then you come to syntax and how nice you are with the developer.
Yeah, but look, when I think about React, for example, for me, the core of React are a few well-defined concepts. It's pretty unfortunate that a lot of React developers may not actually be familiar with these core concepts. And the core concepts, by the way, are the UI as a function, regenerating the entire UI from the state whenever the state changes, and unidirectional data flow. Maybe I'm missing one or another one, but those are like the core concepts for me when I'm thinking about React. And then when I think about, let's say, Solid, it has different core concepts. Or if I'm thinking about Svelte, it also has different core concepts. So a big part of, ideally, of choosing a framework would have been choosing the framework whose architecture, or the architecture that it advocates for building application, best suits your personal tastes. Now, unfortunately, most of
Yes,
us
but
don't go
that's
through this process
that's
because the
assuming that the
framework choice
functionals
is
are
kind of,
equal.
yeah, but just to finish, because in a lot of cases, the framework choice is kind of dictated to us.
You're right,
But
but
anyway,
it's assuming that the functional is equal and assuming that the non-functional is equal. Then you come to statics. And what you're talking about is still just aesthetics. And React, you brought the concept of React. React is neither reactive nor functional today. It has done a lot. It done a huge work moving us forward as front-end developers. There is a reason why it is the number one framework today in the world,
Right.
but it's kind of not what it aimed at doing. Context is, you could argue that props, context, and state are all different ways to get data into the function, and two of them are not functional.
well, the DOM is not functional, JavaScript is not functional, and you're kind of living within the the framework itself is living within the confines of the environment that it's built on. There, you could go with Elm if you really want to go to the extreme, but that there's a price to pay for that as well. Let's say ditching JavaScript in favor of Elm or Reason or something like that.
No one said that aesthetics is simple. Getting the aesthetics of a framework in the right way is super hard. And there is
Mm.
reason why we have lots of frameworks trying different directions and different things. You look at what's happening today. There is one major direction going on today, which is signals. Everyone except React has signals today. There might be some old frameworks that don't have them, that they didn't adopt signals, but almost everyone except React are using signals as the main abstraction for state management. And there is a reason behind that. It trying signals on different places, different frameworks, different syntaxes seems to work. Trying signals in terms of the non-functional performance, okay, again, seems to work. It seems to be something that people comprehend. By the way, signals is not a trivial thing. It takes time to understand that, but once you do, it becomes something that is very robust to use. So again, it's just aesthetics.
Well, for me, it's more than aesthetic actually, because it informs the way that you deconstruct or the problem and then construct the solution. Um, So, for example, um, first of all, I'd like to mention, by the way, that when we had Joe Savona and Satya from Meta to talk about the React compiler,
Mhm.
Joe said very clearly that signals are not in React's future. He basically said,
Mhm.
if signals become a part of the JavaScript language, there's actually a proposal for that, then we will, and I'm speaking for Joe, then we will support it. But otherwise, no signals for React, because
Mhm.
that's not their vision for how front-end applications should be built. Their whole thing is about, reconciliation and stuff like that.
But look at what you're
I
saying right now. You're talking about opinions.
Oh, of course.
Mhm.
Frameworks are opinions. That's kind of my point.
Well, to be honest, I don't agree. I think that
Okay,
this is
good.
kind of a this is kind of a state we arrived by forgetting the functional and non-functional requirements, and we kind of set at very basic frameworks that are not really that are just competing with one another on aesthetics and performance, and that's it. But there's a lot more other stuff that you can compete on.
Such as,
Let's talk about Web Essentials. Web Essentials is a list of, I think, probably 13, 14 items that when you are working as a web developer, you need to take care of. And there are things like creating responsive design, being performant, breakpoints, multilingual, A/B testing. So A/B testing is actually not a web essential, but is nice to have. Uh, cookies
accessibility.
regulation, cookies regulation in the EU, accessibility, the new accessibility regulation in the EU now, GDPR, PIR, and there's more. And all of
Is
those
there a
things are
list
things.
somewhere that I could just publish?
I have it in my. I have it somewhere. I can send it to you. Uh, and basically, all of that list is anything you're doing, anything that is customer facing on the internet. You have to take care of all of that list. If you're doing an enterprise behind the login, you need to take care of most of it. And SEO is another one. And all of that costs a lot of money. Why
Mhm.
aren't frameworks helping us with all of that list of stuff?
I think when you start talking about these things, you're again, and it's an interesting distinction to make from what I see. You're starting to move from talking about frameworks to talking about meta frameworks, from talking about React to talking about Next.js, from talking about Vue to talking about Nuxt, and so on and so forth. At least that's been my experience with these sort of things. Most frameworks these days have a much lower bar in the functionality that they're trying to provide. They're more about, use us instead of using just the DOM.
But keep in mind when you asked about what is the definition of a framework. A framework is not defined as only something on the client that interacts with the DOM. It is defined, as you said, as something that imposes an architecture on your application that guides you into building better software. With that definition, I would expect the framework to help me with all of the web essentials as well, because it's something I have to do. It's something, those are more constraints my application has to work with. I would expect the architecture of the framework to be such that would take care of those concerns, or at least help me to take care of them.
So I have to ask then, because it seems like, if you take this narrow definition of a framework, whether it's, an aesthetic way of putting together an application, or whether it gives you the architecture, whether or not it provides you with some of these essentials, that you would expect it to. It seems like that it seems like there are various definitions and maybe various expectations that people have of a framework, right? Because I could expect that, okay, for me, the framework that I want will do all these things. For somebody else, it may just say, hey, here's how you're going to structure your application. Here's the understanding of here's where the pieces go. Here are a series of tools, libraries, toolkits, etc., that make the API that I'm building against that much more friendly,
Mhm.
right? And so there are all these different pieces that people consider when they have the framework. And it seems like a lot of people are picking it for different reasons, right? So some people may be picking it because, hey, I want a more aesthetically pleasing thing, or I want to be more efficient in my time use by having the framework handle certain things for me, or by fitting a mental model that I can sink my head into. And so, you're saying, well, it's aesthetics, or, it's aesthetics and maybe some of these other things. But how do you really make that decision on what people should consider a framework?
I don't think there is one answer for what is a framework. I think the role of a framework is to help us, to make
Mm-hmm.
us more efficient.
Right.
And because I could just use jQuery and that would work. Yeah, I
We
would
did
can
that
create
for a
amazing
long time.
applications. Yeah. And then we decided to move to React because it is more efficient to write code in React compared to jQuery, both in the
Mm-hmm.
first ramp up and then in maintainability. And then when you're taking just those two concerns, the first ramp up and maintainability, and you're also starting to add things like accessibility into the mix, and you're asking, hey, how much work do I need to do in a React application to make it accessible? Versus, can I get a framework that would help me to heavy lift that burden and making me more efficient there? And the same can go for any of the other web concerns.
Mm-hmm.
My experience, though, has been that most people who use JavaScript frameworks for the front end, because it pulls them kind of away from the actual semantic HTML, end up with mountains of divs, which is anything but semantic, anything but accessible, and so forth. And that if you want to get these in the context of frameworks, usually what you end up is reaching for for component libraries that are compatible with the framework that you can use from within
Mhm.
the framework. Or maybe if the organization is large enough, then it creates its own design system or adopts some external design system in order to get everything you described. So I'm should design systems have been part of the frameworks, the framework itself? Shouldn't they be pluggable to the framework?
I, I think saying that the framework allows a design system that solves some of the concerns is a way to support concerns. Now, with accessibility, that might work. With multilingual or with GDPR or cookies, you might need something else. Design system will not solve cookies regulation for you. So I think eh, even though React and all of the frameworks allow design systems because hey, it just makes us much more efficient to use the design system components. It's still not enough. So I really think that frameworks will need to take that into account. We are in a market that we're shifting in light speed from an unregulated market to a very very regulated market, and that means that the price of creating an application and a website goes up very fast because of those regulations, and we don't know where we're going to end up with. And don't even we didn't even start talking about AI. What does it mean for your framework to make your application AI ready by whatever going to be the dominate AI client application that could going to be the next big thing in the internet beside Google and Facebook and TikTok.
By the way, when you're saying AI ready, are you talking about using AI to generate your code or about integrating AI functionality into the actual end product, or both, or something else?
I'm talking about something else. It's clear for everyone that there is going to be a dominant AI application over the internet. Right now the internet is about $100 billion market around search and about another $100 billion market around social. you can assume that there's going to be another $100 billion market around advertising or discovery or something like that with AI. We don't know the application, we don't know the provider, we don't know when it's going to happen, but it's probably going to happen something like that. And then you want your business to be listed there as well. Today when you build a business or any website, you have to be listed in Google and in social. You probably want a mobile application as well, because you want to cover all the different fronts that you might get users from. So what would be that next front with AI? We don't know yet, but something will happen. And when that will happen, how will your framework help you to be there in the right way?
So you're basically talking about having some sort of presence within an AI driven interface, whatever that might be. Uh, and that's kind of similar to how we currently have, like you said, let's say a page on Facebook or something like, or on Instagram or something like that. Is that what you're
Yes.
talking about?
Yeah. It's you know, think about think about 2011, a year before Facebook really became dominant. If at 2011 I would say, hey, websites, you need to prepare yourself to social. We don't know what's going to be the dominant social application, but something is coming. This is kind of what I would sound like. So we know there's something coming. We just don't know what and who.
A- and again, maybe it's just me or the terminology that I'm familiar with because of React and things similar to it. But React or Vue or Svelte or Solid have set their sights much lower than that. As I said, if the things that you're talking about are more in the realm of meta frameworks, or even meta frameworks. I've heard the term stacks sometimes
Mhm.
used. So for example, Ken C. Dodds has his epic stack,
Hmm.
which involves certain, obviously, um, Remix, but also and React, but also a particular authentication provider and a payment provider and a database provider and so on and so forth. And you integrate all of these things together, hopefully more or less seamlessly, in order to get a more holistic type solution that might address the requirements that you seem to be talking about, or at least that's how it seems to me.
But I have to ask you a question. When you look from jQuery up to React and up to Angular, doesn't it seem the same? jQuery is actually much linear. It tries to do much, compared to React. React is trying to so much more compared to jQuery.
Hmm.
jQuery is just trying to abstract a little bit the DOM APIs, that's all. And it is a framework, the most popular one in the world. And then React is also a framework, but it adds another abstraction layer on top, and Angular is the same. And then we might add another abstraction layer on top. You're trying to put labels on it, but why are those labels important?
Well, I actually think that labels are important. There's that statement that there are two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. And so naming things is actually pretty important. Design patterns exist, are basically ways of naming things so that we have a common vocabulary.
Hmm.
So I do think that having common terminology is actually important for us to be able to converse and exchange ideas and concepts.
I can accept that. Eh, but I think that even having said that, a meta framework is just another framework that does more.
Yeah. Again, for me right now, again, my opinion may certainly change, but right, you seem to have a very different definition, a definition that I used to have for framework versus meta framework was basically that it straddles both sides of the network divide. That meta framework has a server side aspect to it, whereas a framework doesn't. Uh,
Mhm.
but your definition seems again to be much more holistic than mine.
Yeah. But let's work with your definition. I'm fine with that. So when I'm saying that frameworks will need to cope with all of the web essentials, it's fine saying meta frameworks will need to cope with all of the web essentials. Totally fine. It's a little bit limiting, but I don't care. That's fine. Now we can go to more extreme things that are happening with frameworks. Again, meta frameworks might be. And I'm seeing two trends or two lines that are kind of intertwined together. One is the idea of gradual rendering. When we start seeing that a little bit in frameworks, the idea of gradual rendering is that let's start shifting rendering back as much as we can. Now
To
you
the
have
service side, you mean?
to the server side and to earlier timeline. Now you
Hmm.
already have frameworks that are doing normally we would call that build time rendering or static site generation, but I actually don't like this definition. When you look at data, you have data that changes slowly, like blog posts and products, and I don't know, there's many things that change slowly, and then there's things that change fast, and then there are things that change interactively when user clicks on something and something changes on the client. So interactive things have state management and run on the client. Fast changing, you need to do in SSR. Slowly changing, you can do an event of something changed. Why can't I combine all three of them in one page, in one component? Now, you're starting to see things like that happening. React server components lets a developer to choose to have one layer server rendered, which is only server rendered, and then have another layer or another subcomponent that is rendered on the server but is also interactive on the client. Quick is starting to do stuff like that. Other frameworks are starting to do stuff like that, but I haven't really seen that as being a first-class pattern in any of the frameworks.
I would take it a step further. It seems to me that, and I'll be blunt, it seems that framework makers are solving a problem that the market is not looking for them to solve. I've spoken to a lot of organizations in this context who basically say, we want React on the front end and something else doing RESTful APIs on the back end, and I don't want React on my back end. And next and Vercel's success notwithstanding, the majority of enterprise React applications that I'm seeing are very much keeping the framework on the client side only.
You're right. And yet, when you go and keep in mind that Vercel is building websites. In website, you must have server-side rendering because of SEO, again, because of Web Essentials. But then even for the enterprises, they get to a point where they say, hey, but we have a performance problem, or we have a flickering, or it takes long to load the page, and we need to do something about that. Now, when you run React on the server, when React was not designed to work on a server environment, what Vercel were doing is actually very smart, but they're trying to take something that doesn't really fit in that environment and make it work in that environment. It wasn't designed for it. Think what would happen if you actually go and design a framework that would work in such a way and would support both the website and enterprise use cases.
Well, I guess Chuck, you're supposed to say at this point. That's why we have Rails and what's the name
I've
of
been refraining from saying that this whole time. So
Rails and what's the name of that the thing that you use in Rails?
stimulus,
Stimulus or the other one,
turbo,
turbo, stimulus, whatever. You've got a whole bunch of terms
hot
for it.
wire.
Hotwire, I think that was the one.
Yeah.
Well, Rails did a lot of really good stuff. And I think it's kind of, when you look at the what I would call the 1.5 age of the internet, which is basically static, basically server-side rendering everything, and a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of jQuery on the client. Your WordPress is there, Shopify is there, Rails is there. Rails is kind of the best of the breed.
Mhm.
But it does suffer, and there is a reason why we moved to Web 2.0, which starts with React and Angular, which are client-first libraries, simply because you want to be very productive on the client and very interactive on the client and very fast on the client. And then, when you start moving from front-end libraries back to the backend, why would I use a different language for the backend and the front end? Why would I use React on the front end and Rails on the backend? It makes my life much harder. And normally that would be two different people. You know Rails in a very good way. For someone else that needs to learn both React and Rails and how to connect them together, that's harder than using Next.js. And again, it's the
Yeah,
principle of
maybe.
locality. So
Yeah, I
and
thought
I
you were
think
going to go to Express or something. And I'm like,
no, Express
yeah.
Express
If
is
you're
actually
going
not
React to
better.
Next, I can see that.
Yeah, and I think what I think we're kind of converging on is there's a term that I just don't want to use. So instead, I'm going to say frameworks that are designed both for the backend and the front end as first-class citizens. And when
Okay.
I'm going to make a conjecture. Wait a
yeah,
minute. I think that what you, or at least what I'll restate what I seem to be hearing you say. You're basically saying most modern frameworks that we've seen started out client side and then evolved to work on the back end as well. So Next.js grew out of React and it's effectively implementing a React specification. Nux grew out of Vue, so on and so forth. What you're saying is, we've had Node.js and whatnot on the back end long enough so that we can think about frameworks evolving the other way around, starting their life on the back end and then evolving to support the front end. Am I getting the gist of what you're saying?
almost what I'm saying is think about a framework that is designed to work on all three life cycles of the web. And you have three life cycles, not two of them. You have one for slowly changing data, like a product was updated maybe once a day or once a week. You have a fast changing data that you have to render for a user directly on the server, like username or cookies. And then you have interactive data or interactive interactions on the client and state management. And it doesn't make any sense that those are three different abstractions that are done in three different ways. Why can't I do them in one? Why can't I get a framework that speaks in that language and just does it all and not force me to start meshing up different things and different concepts to try and understand what goes where?
I mean, a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that, I mean, I kind of manage this stuff so that it changes when it needs to, or gets, the interaction happens when it needs to. I don't know that I think of them as all that different, right? They all more or less use the same mechanisms, or am I missing something?
Well, let me put it this way. What I'm seeing a lot are basically people dealing with this problem by effectively ignoring it. So, for example, if they build a wholly client-side render application and just make calls back to the to restful endpoints whenever they need to get more data. So they don't need to think about how often the data changes. So they respond quickly
Hmm.
to client-side interactions,
Mhm.
and then whenever they need to get data from the backend, they just call a RESTful API, and it comes whichever way it comes. So effectively, they respond to both types of interactions, or through all three types of interactions, in essentially the exact same way, by writing event handlers in JavaScript that handle events. These events
Mhm.
might be a mouse click, or these events might be some data arriving over the network. It's all the same. Um, and I agree with Yoav that React Server Components have been trying to propose a new approach to dealing with it, basically saying, I'm rendering some stuff on the server, I'm rendering some stuff on the client, I'm rendering some stuff on both sides. Um, by the way, I totally don't know how many organizations are actually using um, React Server Components in production, certainly in anger, let's say. It's an interesting question. Um, as I said, there's a growing, it seems that Next.js is eating the React website market, that the majority of
A
Mhm.
lot
new
of it.
React websites are being built using Next.js, but I have no idea how many of them are actually using React Server Components, certainly how many of them are actually using React Server Components correctly. Um, that's a totally different question. It's an interesting
Yeah.
one, and I don't know how to get this data. How do you think a solution to that might come along, or might look like, that actually solves that problem with lower friction and greater
So
acceptance?
you can see what both Next and well, I forgot the name. There's another framework, and they're doing data loaders that, by the name of the data loader function, you know on which environment to run it. You can look at what Quix is doing, where
Hmm.
there is a specific API which is very similar, but a specific API that says, hey, this is something that runs on the server. Or I think in the case of Quick, everything is by default running on the server and only being loaded to the client if needed. And the compiler is kind of understanding what needs to be downloaded to the client. I think we need to figure out the syntax. We don't have it today.
By the way, syntax, as far as I can tell, seems to me the solution that these meta frameworks, I'll use that term, are adopting, seems to be RPC based. So that when it's code, it's functions that when they are executed on the server, it's just a function call. But when they're executed on the client, it becomes serialized automatically over the wire.
Yeah.
So that's the abstraction that I'm seeing kind of being adopted for addressing that issue. Now, even that has different approaches associated with it. So both, let's say we had Tenor Lindsley talking about what he's doing with 10 stack start, and he's also using RPC, but he's doing it in a very different way than the way that Next.js is using RPC, even though you
Mhm.
might say that in both cases it is kind of RPC.
Yeah. Anyway, I want to take you even one step more. We talked about design systems. You're using components from design systems. Sometimes those components have a large number of configuration options. For instance, you might have a gallery that might have multiple layouts, and you might be choosing one layout or another. And if that choice is static, it's basically a constant, or even if it is a choice made by slowly changing data, why would you download to the browser the full component with all of the different options? Why not start looking at the values of slowly changing data, which after defining what is that value, it basically become constant data after that first phase of rendering. And then let's start deleting all the unnecessary code. So all of the other layouts of the gallery, they don't need to be there. All of the other style options, they don't need to be there. You might have different tabs or different screens or different options that you can just delete and just remove. And it might go all the way down to your design system that might have lots of very complicated components because they need to cope with lots and complicated situations. A drop down with 50 different options of how to open a drop down, but you only need one. So why would you download to the browser all of the different options? So there is also another potential here for lots of very aggressive optimizations that, to be honest, no one is doing today.
Well, I think Quick, as that you mentioned, is kind of trying to do at least some of this stuff. Basically, it's
Mhm.
using a compiler to or bundler or smart bundler or transpiler, call it what you will, to to decide for you which code needs to exist where, effectively. And then again, if we're talking about stuff like the hot wire that Chuck mentioned before, when we spoke about what's it called, HTMX. It's
Right.
basically
Mhm.
saying why send JSON over the wire, that I need to have smarts on the client side to be able to process it according to sophisticated logic and transform
Right.
it into HTML, when I can just send HTML. And to an extent, again, React Server components are kind of going in that direction. They're not actually sending HTML, they're sending virtual DOM, as it were, over the wire. But again, it's basically the idea of having a generic mechanism that transforms it into UI, rather than having to download all the custom logic.
But think about what's happening here. You have lots of innovation going on all around from meta frameworks around performance and around making your application more efficient. Quick is doing that, Server Components is doing that, HTMX is doing that, and we're kind of all searching for what would be the right abstraction when we want to build an application or a website. I would say that. And add to that all of the web concerns, and you get like a big area of activity just around the existing frameworks and the existing needs.
So, given everything that we've said so far, and given everything that you've explained, what is the future of frameworks?
So I think my bet, which is, and again I'm far reaching. I think we need to add two more requirements into the mix. I think that if the only reason to move from React to another framework is aesthetics and performance, it's not good enough. And that includes Vue and Svelte and Quick and everything else, and HTMX and so on. And that's why React, no one is leaving React, to be honest, because the need is not strong enough. But I think there are two other requirements that are very strong. One is to be able to consume third-party components in a way that both you and the component are safe from one another. And just last summer, we had an issue where uh, VS Code plugins appeared to be there was published an article that says that a, a research group managed to put a malicious VS Code plugin with hundreds of thousands of developers. And then they scanned the plugin market for VS Code, and thousands of plugins on VS Code are potentially malicious. And then you have WordPress, which is known to be, all of the plugins to be, or not all of them, but a lot of them to be really problematic. And then
Mhm.
you have lots of other cases like that. And then you're downloading a free NPM across your company, all around, talking about enterprises, and you have no idea what attack vectors are going on through NPM. And it is an attack vector to get a certain version of a library to be legit, and then the next one, a minor version, to have some vulnerability or even some attack, and you just download it using your code in your application, and you're exposed to it. So what if I can give you a framework? I'm not saying that I can give you that, but what if the future framework would protect you from that automatically? Just
But
one example.
but can a framework really do that? Doesn't that need to be solved at the platform level, or at least
I will.
have, you know, for the platform to provide building blocks that the frameworks can then use to provide an holistic solution to stuff like that?
I think you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, if someone will make something like that, will be able to create a framework that has such a new requirement working within it in some way, and people are innovative, they'll find a way, for instance, that would be a reason to move frameworks. And I think two of the requirements that I can put on the table for frameworks to challenge, that would challenge our existing frameworks, is one, the security, and the second one is design to code. Those are the two ones. Because with both of either one of those will challenge everything we have today in a significant way. So the
Well,
ultimate framework from
yeah, I know it's interesting because look, so for example, the Quick Gang made a bet that getting a more performance solution would get people to switch, and so far it hasn't really happened. Certainly not en masse. Um, Whether or not people will switch for that, it's maybe I have no insight.
but that's the point. When the only thing you're comparing are non-functionals, it's very hard to get someone to switch. You have to be really, really better and in a really pain point. When you're starting to move to either, you know, functionals and for a framework, allowing designer to work in a different way, that's a functional thing. It changes the whole DNA of your framework. Or when solving a big problem like security, and your security team is like, hey, hey, dev team, you know, we can drop all of that $1 million deal of code scanning that we're doing all the time to make sure all of your NPM dependencies are working and just use a secure framework. Then again, no one knows what the future is going to be. But my bet is that a future framework will not be just about aesthetics and better performance. There's going to be some other need, some other requirement, or some other problem that it solves on top of all of the existing problems. It might be security, might be design to code, might be something else. I don't know.
So I'll kind of inverse your statement. What you're saying is that there are a couple of hard problems that we need to be solving that fall under the umbrella term Web Essentials. Current existing frameworks and even meta frameworks are not solving these problems or not sufficiently solving these problems. Something will come along that will, and you want to call that the future framework.
I would say that with learning of the aesthetics of our current frameworks, that would probably be our next big framework.
I would also very much, by the way, like to have a link to that list of Web Essentials, by the way.
I'll send it for you. I think I had it in the React Next presentation I did last year, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, that'll be
Yeah.
great. I'll look at
Yeah.
that presentation as well. I think I did, but I don't remember off the top of my head right
Mm.
now.
Yeah, we're getting toward the end of our scheduled time, and I have to go soon. So, is there some kind of overriding point that you want to make, or some conclusion that you want to give us, Yoav?
I think I would say that we are at a point where something is going to happen with web frameworks. When you look at when you want to predict the future, you look at the history. And our web frameworks, age one was in 1995, server rendering. Age 1.5 was in around 2001 with jQuery. Uh, Age 2 was with Angular and React around 2010. And then the meta frameworks and headless CMS systems 2016. That's kind of the 2.5 age. And now there's all kinds of different innovations and ideas floating around trying to make something new. And at the same time, we're moving from a non-regulated market to a highly regulated market. And on the same time, we have AI coming into the mix. And there's going to be another something that is going to challenge the internet with AI. By the way, it's not going to replace anything. It's just going to be another distribution channel based on AI that's going to be accompanying web and mobile and social. So with all of that together, something big is going to happen with web frameworks. What is it? I think that is the big question. What I can promise you is that it's not anything like the frameworks we have today. It's not going to be just aesthetics and little bit better performance. It's going to be something bigger.
All right, cool. Let's go ahead and do our picks, and then we'll.
Chuck, I
Yeah.
apologize, but I actually have to drop off.
Okay.
So, Yoav, as usual, it's been a pleasure, and as usual, I've learned a lot. So
Done.
thank you for coming on our show again.
Was great seeing you
Yeah.
again, and we need to meet. More frequently. We're just living 500
I
yards from one another.
I totally agree. I'll ping you, or you ping me. You know how to find me.
We will.
Yeah,
Bye.
good deal.
Bye.
Yeah, this has been really great for just kind of making me think about things. Anyway, I'll go ahead and do picks, and then if you want to do picks, Yoav, that'd be awesome. I'm going to start out with a board game pick. Or did you have time to do picks, Dan? Since I see you still here.
I don't. How do I click the Leave Studio, or
Yeah,
do
you
I
can
need
click Leave Studio, and then just leave the tab open, and it'll upload
to?
your
Okay,
end of things.
will do. Thank you. Bye bye.
Yep.
Bye.
So yeah, I always do a board game pick. Lately, that's kind of been the thing. So I'm trying to think because we haven't played anything new lately. One game that we've been playing that what's it called? Give me a second. Okay, yeah. Okay, let me start over. So one game that my family's played a bit lately is called The Crew Mission Deep Sea. Now, I've picked The Crew before. That was the quest for Planet 9. And they're effectively the same. The difference is that with the Crew, the Deep Sea version, what you wind up doing is you still have the missions, right? So it still gives you a handicap of some kind. You can't, yeah, you have to do things in a certain order, or right, you do so many missions. The difference is that with the deep sea mission, the missions you actually flip cards over just like you did in the quest for Planet 9, but they can be anything from you have to take 2 cards of this color and 2 cards of that color, or I mean, there are all kinds of things. Whereas with the original version, you'd flip it over and you'd have to take that card, and then you had little tiles you'd put on them. You have to do this one first and this one last, or you have to do these 3 in order, or you have to do this one first and the next 2 in order after that, and then this one has to be last, or things like that. So and it's trick taking. So anyway, it's pretty simple and straightforward as far as all that goes. Game Board Geek, or Board Game Geek, it rates it at a 2.04. So it's right around casual gamer. Good, pick it up and have fun with it. I like playing these games with 4 people. You can play 3 to 5, and it's not bad at 3 or 5. But anyway, it's a fun game. So I'm gonna pick that for my pick. My wife and I watched a movie this week called Homestead. Let me get a link for this and put it in the comments. But we watched a movie called Homestead, and it's so essentially the premise of the show. If you go watch the trailer, this is about what you'll get from it. Is there's a nuclear bomb that goes off in California, in Southern California, and then there are other terrorist attacks. It's a little fuzzy on it, but the gist I got was that there are major power outages. The power grid goes out on the East Coast of the United States, and so there's this homestead. Essentially, it's some land. I kind of gathered it was in Montana, but I'm not sure on that. But anyway, this guy hires an ex-Green Beret to put together a security team just in case there's kind of a worldwide catastrophe and he needs to protect his area. And he's like this uber prepper, right? So they have medical supplies, and they grow stuff on their property and all kinds of stuff like that. And so this catastrophe hits, and so this guy basically grabs his family and heads up to where this homestead is, and they set things up and are protecting the homestead kind of thing. It was really good. And then when we watched it afterwards, so we're part of the Angel Guild, which is Angel Studios is the one that put it out. Angel Studios also did The Chosen and a bunch of other movies that I've picked. They turned it into a series, and so we actually watched the first episode of the series too, and it's pretty good. So I'm going to pick that if that's kind of your cup of tea. Kind of it kind of walks you through the apocalypse, and anyway, it's really awesome. So I've been enjoying that, and
so talking about the apocalypse, I've seen the series Van Helsing recently, which is another adaptation of vampires taking over America,
right.
But it's it's very, very fun. But my pick is actually going to be a different movie. I would go with Damsel, which is a movie about a princess that is, basically it's a common girl that is a prince's chosen heir to be his wife, and it's like a fairy tale story. And then after the marriage, he kind of throws her into a pit to be sacrificed to a dragon. And then it kind of goes off rails and becomes a very different movie, which, one of the things that I liked about it is that first, it's very, very different. And second, it doesn't go with the regular style of the prince saves the princess. It actually goes the other way around, which is really encouraging and really fresh, I would say. Uh, as for a game, is it okay to choose a cards game?
Mm-hmm.
There is a
Yeah.
game that I really enjoy playing with my kids called Quins, and it actually starts to become a recurring idea of queens and princes.
Uh-huh.
But it's a game where there are uh, 10 queens, or so it's
Uh-huh.
a 16 queens on the board, which are upside down. You don't know which card is which queen,
Oh, Sleeping
and
Queens.
sleepy queens, yeah.
Yeah, I've played
And
this with my kids. It's a fun one.
it's a really fun one, and my kids are very enthusiastic about that. They're very passionate, so that's just great game.
Yeah. It's very approachable. So my daughter is 9 now, but I think we got it when she was like 6 or 7, and it's definitely approachable for younger kids. But yeah, there's enough meat to the game to where adults would enjoy playing with it. It's not one I would pick to play with my friends, but with my kids, definitely. And Board Game Geek weights it at 1.05, so it's got fairly simple mechanics. I think it plays 2 to 5 people too. That's what it says here. And yeah, terrific game.
Yeah, it's a great game, and my kids are 9 and 11, which is just the right age,
Yeah.
and it works wonders with them.
Yeah, I had somebody ask me on, I think it was Ruby Rogues last week. They asked me what games I recommend for kids, and I listed a whole bunch there. But there are a ton of just terrific games you can play with kids. That, yeah, I wonder if Board Game Geek actually has a list for kids. I know they have categories here. Here we go, categories.
Yeah, I actually never tried that board game geeks.
Yeah, Board Game Geek. So I'll just do that as a pick, and I'll just throw it out as well. So Board Game Geek, the way that it works is it's essentially kind of this database of board games, and they do board games and card games. And then what you can do is they have forums as well. So if you, a lot of times I'm on Board Game Geek because I'm going, what is the, I have a question about a mechanic in a game, right? So they didn't clarify, and so
Yeah,
I need to know, hey, how does this work or that work? And
I have to say,
anyway.
the directory I'm looking at is Whiskey Base, and it's a little bit different. It's kind of give ratings for different whiskey drums, and so you can know which spirit to get, especially when you go to the more unique ones and more rare ones. Just have Glengarry 29 on its way to my house, which is supposed to be 95, I think, on Whiskey Base, which is kind of amazing. We'll see how it goes.
Very cool. Yeah, I don't drink alcohol at all, but yeah, I mean, we used to have somebody that would pick beers every episode. So, right, it's like, hey, you have to try this one, and sometimes they were local brews, and sometimes, yeah, I could definitely see myself getting into that if that was my thing. But yeah, very cool. Well, Yoav, if people want to check out Wix Enterprise, or they want to see what you're working on, or catch you at a conference or anything, how do they find you?
Twitter, that's the easiest one. Also, there is Week Engineering blog. There is a lot of stuff there, and just give me a call. Reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'm there. I'll be happy to help anyone.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me here. It was super fun.
Right. Yeah. Until next time, folks, Max out.